So what? You just push paper for the army. My cousin mocked at the barbecue. I wiped my hands and said calmly, "No, I fly." He laughed. "Oh, really? What's your call sign then?" I answered, "Iron Widow." His father, a Navy SEAL, froze. "Son, apologize." Now, he knew exactly who I was. Opening with a gentle, reflective tone that quickly shifts to something more intense. You know, there are some moments in life that just snap you awake. Moments where you realize you've been walking around with blinders on, letting people define you in ways that are just wrong. Have you ever felt that? Like you're constantly being underestimated, or worse, outright mocked, by the very people who should have your back? Well, I sure did. For years, Lieutenant Colonel Brittany Hawking, call sign Iron Widow, bit my tongue. I smiled through the casual jabs, the dismissive jokes, at countless family gatherings. But then, one sweltering summer day, my cousin Ryan, the perpetual golden boy, took it too far. He mocked my entire career, my life's work, right in front of his father, a decorated Navy SEAL. And in that instant, something inside me broke. What happened next? Well, it changed absolutely everything. Transition to a more conversational, storytelling tone. I grew up in a perfectly average, middle-class family in Virginia. Our lives revolved around these cookouts, these birthdays, always in the same backyard where everyone thought they knew exactly who I was and who I'd become. My cousin, Ryan, he was the star of the show. Loud, athletic, always soaking up all the attention. His dad, Commander Jack Hawking, my uncle, was this quiet, authoritative Navy SEAL. As a kid, I absolutely idolized him. I wanted to make him proud, more than anything. When I joined the Air Force, most of the family just brushed it off. "It's a phase," they'd say. They joked I was too quiet, too careful for the military. I didn't argue. I didn't correct them. I just worked harder. I studied longer, flew more hours, and eventually, I earned my wings. By 27, I was an Air Force captain, a pilot with deployments under my belt, and a call sign, Iron Widow. But those family gatherings? They never changed. Same burgers, same stories, same low-level condescension from the relatives who'd never left our small town. Ryan's teasing used to just roll off me. Used to. That backyard was a constant fixture every summer. The red brick patio, the grill my dad had owned since I was a child, kids running through the sprinklers. My mom would put out her famous potato salad and coleslaw in those plastic bowls with lids that never quite sealed. My dad, an engineer who spent decades designing systems for defense contractors, he'd stand by the grill, beer in hand, nodding along to whatever story was being told. I knew he was proud of me. He never said it out loud, not really. He'd just squeeze my shoulder when I came home on leave and ask if I was eating enough. Ryan's mom, my Aunt Mary Ann, had that permanent hostess smile. You know the kind. It smooths over everything, pretends nothing is wrong, even when it so clearly is. She'd hug me so tight and say, "Look at you, all grown up," like I was still 12. They all meant well, I think. But Ryan had changed. As a kid, he was fun, reckless, maybe, in that invincible way boys are. We'd climb trees, race bikes, throw rocks into the creek. He looked up to his dad, the way all military kids do. But somewhere along the way, that admiration just curdled. He started wearing his father's legacy like a jacket that was way too big for him, never quite fitting. By the time I enlisted, Ryan had dropped out of community college. He was working at a gym, training clients, and talking about discipline like he'd invented it. He'd tell these dramatic stories at family dinners about pushing through pain, about mental toughness. And everyone would nod along, like he'd earned the right to speak on it. Meanwhile, I was at Lackland Air Force Base, running until my lungs burned, learning to fly aircraft that cost more than every house on our block combined. I didn't talk about it much, not because I was ashamed, but because I didn't feel the need to. The work spoke for itself. When I came home after my first deployment, my uniform still carried the faint scent of jet fuel and desert dust. I'd been flying close air support missions out of Bugram, long, grueling hours in the cockpit, eyes constantly scanning for targets, coordinating with ground units, making sure our people came home. It wasn't glamorous. It was exhausting, precise, absolutely necessary. Ryan saw the uniform, and he just smirked. "You look tired," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "What, paper jams at headquarters?" A dramatic pause, The tone shifts to anger/disbelief. The room went quiet. A suffocating silence. My mother's smile faltered. My father set his beer down a little too hard. Commander Hawking, who'd been laughing at something one of the uncles said, glanced over at me. His expression didn't change, not overtly, but I saw this flicker. Maybe respect, maybe an apology. But he didn't correct his son. I just laughed it off. Something like that, I said, a hollow sound. That was the first time I truly understood how deep the imbalance ran. Ryan needed to be the tough one, the military-adjacent one, the one people respected by association. And I was just the quiet girl who flew planes. Nobody asked what that really meant. Nobody wanted to know. I'd earned my wings at 23, after a year of training that washed out more than half my class. Flight school wasn't about being brave. It was about precision, calm under pressure, making split-second decisions when lives hung in the balance. I wasn't the best pilot, but I was consistent. I didn't panic. I didn't freeze. When the instructors pushed us, I pushed back harder. My call sign came later, during my second deployment. Call signs aren't chosen, you know. They're given to you by your squadron, usually after you've done something memorable. Sometimes embarrassing, sometimes legendary. Mine came after a night mission in Helmand Province. A mission I still don't talk about at family gatherings. We were flying support for a SEAL recon team, and they'd gotten pinned down in a valley. The extraction corridor was a firestorm. Enemy fire lit up the ridgelines, RPGs streaking across the sky. The original extraction chopper took damage and had to pull back. The team was stranded, taking casualties, running low on ammo. Command was scrambling. I was circling overhead in my A-10 Warthog, low on fuel. Way past the point I should have returned to base. My wingman, Captain Drew Sanderson. He was trying to talk me down. Widow, we're bingo fuel. We have to go. I looked at the coordinates, at the thermal images of the team below, and I made a choice. Negative. I'm making a pass. I dropped low, lower than doctrine recommended, and I lit up that ridgeline with everything I had. 30mm cannon fire, precision that came from muscle memory and 1,000 hours of training. I cleared the corridor long enough for the backup chopper to get in and pull them out. Every single SEAL made it home. When I landed back at base, my aircraft had taken fire. Not enough to down me, but enough that the maintenance crew gave me a look that said, "You used up some luck, ma'am." My squadron commander didn't reprimand me. He just nodded and walked away. 2 days later, the call sign was official, Iron Widow. The pilot who didn't leave people behind. Commander Hawking knew that story. He'd served with some of those SEALs. He knew what it meant when someone flew into a hot zone to pull out a team. But he never told Ryan. And Ryan never asked. He just kept talking about discipline, about toughness, about things he'd never actually done. I didn't resent him for it. Not really. Resentment takes energy, and I was too busy flying, training, leading. But I noticed the pattern. Every family gathering, every holiday, every backyard barbecue, Ryan found a way to diminish what I did. It was never overtly hostile, just casual, dismissive. "Oh, Brittany's home. How's the office job?" Or, "Must be nice, flying a desk." And every time, the family would laugh. Uncomfortable, but unwilling to intervene. My mother would change the subject. My father would clear his throat. Commander Hawking would look at me with that same unreadable expression, and I'd wonder if he was waiting for me to defend myself, or if he thought I didn't need to. I told myself it didn't matter. I had my work. I had my squadron. I had the respect of the people who actually understood what I did. That should have been enough. And most days it was. The older Ryan got, the more he leaned on his father's shadow. He'd brag about military discipline he'd never earned and dismiss my career as desk duty. The thing about being underestimated, though, is that it gives you room to move. People who don't take you seriously don't watch you closely. They don't ask questions. They don't notice when you've changed, grown, become someone they wouldn't recognize if they actually looked. I was 29 when I came home from Kandahar. That deployment had been different. Longer. Harder. We'd flown missions supporting ground operations, close air support for convoys, recon for special operations teams, medevac cover when things went sideways. I'd logged over 200 combat hours in 6 months. My squadron commander had put me in for an accommodation. I didn't talk about it at home. Ryan was 31 then, still at the gym, still living in the same apartment. He had a girlfriend who seemed nice enough, though she always looked a little tired at family gatherings, like she'd heard all of Ryan's stories twice already. That particular dinner, my Aunt Marianne had made lasagna. The house smelled like garlic and tomato sauce. My younger cousins were running around, yelling. My parents were busy. I'd just arrived, still in my civilian clothes, jeans, a simple blouse. Nothing to suggest I'd spent the last 6 months in a war zone. Ryan saw me first. "Brittany, how's the Air Force treating you?" I set my bag down. "Good. Busy." He grinned. That same easy grin, the one that made people like him even when he was being insufferable. "Yeah, I bet. Been busy filing reports? Scheduling flights?" A shift in tone, a mix of resignation and simmering frustration. I could have corrected him. I could have told him about the mission where we provided cover for a medevac extraction under fire. Or the night I'd flown low enough to draw enemy attention away from a convoy that was taking casualties. I could have mentioned the commendation, the fact that I was being considered for early promotion to major. But I didn't. Because the truth was, I didn't owe him an explanation. "Something like that," I said, my voice flat. He laughed, and a few other relatives joined in. That polite, uncomfortable laughter that fills a space when no one knows what else to say. My mother appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on a dish towel, and gave me a look that screamed, "Let it go." So I did. I let it go, just like I always had. But something shifted that night. Maybe it was the exhaustion, or maybe it was the sharp realization that I'd been letting this happen for years. I'd been so focused on proving myself in the places that mattered, in the cockpit, with my squadron, in combat, that I'd never bothered to set the record straight at home. And that silence had allowed Ryan to build his own narrative. One where I was just a pilot who did paperwork, and he was the one who understood what toughness really meant. After dinner, I found Commander Hawking on the back porch. He was standing by the railing, looking out at the yard, a beer in his hand. He glanced over when I stepped outside. For a moment, neither of us said anything. "Heard you did good work in Kandahar," he said finally. I just shrugged. "Just my job." He nodded slowly, and I could see him weighing his words. "Ryan doesn't mean anything by it. You know, he's just trying to find his place." The tone hardened slightly, a quiet resolve. I looked at him then. Really looked at him. Commander Jack Hawking, a man who'd spent 25 years in the Navy, who'd led teams into some of the most dangerous places on Earth, who'd earned every ounce of respect he carried. And here he was, making excuses for his son. "I know," I said, "but he doesn't get to define my place." He didn't respond, not verbally, but something in his expression shifted. A flicker of recognition, maybe even approval. He raised his beer in a small, quiet toast. I nodded back. The next family gathering was a 4th of July barbecue. Same backyard, same grill, same relatives. Ryan was there with his girlfriend, talking loudly about some new training program he was developing, functional fitness and mental resilience, he called it. I was near the cooler, pulling out a soda when he turned to me. "So, Brittany, you ever think about doing something more hands-on? I mean, flying's cool and all, but it's not like you're really in the fight, you know." I popped the tab on the soda and took a slow sip, letting the moment stretch out. My father, who'd been flipping burgers nearby, went still. My mother's conversation with Aunt Marian faltered. Commander Hawking, on the other side of the patio, turned his head slightly, watching. The pivotal moment, strong and direct, I met Ryan's eyes. "I am in the fight, Ryan. That's the part you don't understand." He blinked, genuinely caught off guard by my directness. "I didn't mean, I know what you meant." I cut him off, my voice calm but firm. "And I'm telling you, you're wrong." The silence that followed was different from the usual uncomfortable pauses. This one had weight. My father went back to the grill, but I saw the hint of a smile on his face. My mother gave me a small, approving nod. "And Commander Hawking?" He raised his beer again, just slightly, that same quiet toast. Ryan didn't push it. He changed the subject, started talking about something else. But the dynamic had shifted. For the first time, I'd drawn a line, and everyone had seen it. I didn't need to explain myself, didn't need to justify my career or my choices. But I also didn't need to let someone else's insecurity define me. That was the lesson I'd been learning, slowly, painfully, over years of deployments and family gatherings. Respect isn't something you demand. It's something you earn. And sometimes, it's something you claim. Ryan and I didn't talk much for the rest of that summer. Not out of anger, but out of a new understanding. He'd built his identity around proximity to toughness, and I'd built mine around actually living it. We were never going to see eye to eye, and that was okay. I had my life, He had his, and the family was finally starting to see the difference. The true turning point came at the next summer barbecue. Red plastic cups, kids playing tag, country music humming in the background. Ryan was in full showman mode, telling exaggerated stories about his training. I was at the grill, helping my father. It was late August, humid, that thick Virginia air. I'd been home for 3 days, a brief leave between training cycles. I was 31, still a captain, but promotion board results were due any day. I'd been recommended for major by my squadron commander, and if they agreed, I'd pin on those oak leaves by my next birthday. I hadn't mentioned it to anyone. Felt like tempting fate. Ryan was holding court near the picnic table, surrounded by younger cousins and a few neighbors. He was talking about some new certification he'd gotten, something about high-intensity interval training. He had that animated quality he always got when he had an audience, gesturing wildly, his voice carrying across the yard. My father had gone inside for more propane, and I was standing there with the spatula, watching the meat sizzle, when Ryan's voice cut through the chatter, loud enough for everyone. "So what? You file paperwork for the Army." I looked up. He was grinning at me. That same easy grin, but there was something performative about it. He wanted a reaction, wanted to be the funny one, the guy who could get away with teasing his accomplished cousin, because, hey, it was all in good fun, right? I wiped my hands on a napkin, taking my time. "No," I said, my voice steady. "I fly." He laughed, and a few people around him laughed too, uncertainly. "Oh yeah? What's your call sign then?" The tension escalates sharply. The reveal, the question hung in the air. Call signs aren't something most civilians understand. They think it's like a nickname, something cool you pick for yourself. They don't realize it's a mark of respect, earned through actions, given by the people who fly beside you. And they definitely don't realize that some call signs carry weight far beyond the squadron. I met his eyes. Iron Widow. The name hit that backyard like a sudden drop in air pressure before a storm. The laughter stopped. A few people glanced at each other, confused by the sudden shift. And Commander Jack Hawking, who'd been laughing with my father and a couple of uncles near the cooler, went absolutely still. He turned slowly, his eyes locking onto mine with an intensity I'd rarely seen outside of formal military settings. For a moment, he just stared, and I could practically see him running through his mental files, connecting dots, verifying what he'd just heard. Then he looked at his son. "Boy, apologize now." Ryan froze. The grin slid off his face, replaced by confusion and the first hint of genuine embarrassment. "Dad, I was just now." The word came out flat. No room for negotiation. This wasn't a suggestion. This wasn't parental annoyance. This was an order, delivered with the full weight of 2.5 decades of command experience. Ryan's face flushed. He looked at me, then back at his father, trying desperately to understand what had just happened. I didn't mean anything by it. Commander Hawking took 3 deliberate steps toward him, closing the distance with that controlled movement that said he was exercising immense restraint. "You just disrespected a combat pilot who saved my teammates. You think that's funny?" The backyard had gone silent. Even the kids had stopped playing, sensing something significant was happening, even if they didn't understand what. My mother stood frozen by the back door, a pitcher of lemonade in her hands. My father had returned with the propane tank and was standing at the edge of the patio, watching intently. Ryan's mouth opened and closed. "I didn't know." "You didn't know because you didn't ask," Commander Hawking said, his voice low and dangerous. "You assumed. You mocked. And now you're going to apologize." I saw the moment Ryan's pride wrestled with his survival instinct. His jaw tightened, his hands clenched at his sides. For a second, I thought he might double down, try to salvage his dignity by arguing. But then he looked at his father's face and saw something that made him think better of it. He turned to me, and I could see the immense effort it took. "I'm sorry. I didn't know what you did." I nodded, accepting it. "It's fine." But it wasn't fine. Not really. Because Commander Hawking wasn't done. He was still standing there, his focus entirely on his son. And when he spoke again, his voice was quieter, but somehow even more intense. "Iron Widow," he said, "is the call sign of the pilot who flew into a hot extraction zone in Helmand Province to pull out a SEAL recon team that was pinned down and taking casualties. She flew low enough that she took fire herself. She cleared the corridor long enough for the medevac to get in and extract every single man. Do you understand what that means?" Ryan nodded, but I could tell he didn't. Not really. He understood that it was significant, that his father respected it. But the actual reality of what I'd done, the calculations, the fear management, the precision required to put an aircraft exactly where it needed to be while people were shooting at you, that was beyond his frame of reference. Commander Hawking looked at me then, and his expression softened just slightly. My unit still talks about you. They don't know your real name, but they know Iron Widow, the pilot who doesn't leave people behind. A touch of vulnerability and raw emotion. I felt my throat tighten. I'd done that mission 3 years ago. I try not to think about it too much since. Not because it wasn't important, but because dwelling on it made it harder to do the next mission and the one after that. You can't fly if you're thinking about all the ways it could go wrong. I did my job, I said, my voice a little rough. You did more than that, he said. And my son is going to remember that from now on. He turned back to Ryan, and there was something almost sad in his expression. You want respect? You earn it. You don't tear down someone else to build yourself up. Understood. Ryan nodded, his face still flushed, his embarrassment now mixed with something that looked like shame. Yes, sir. Commander Hawking clapped him once on the shoulder, firm but not harsh, and then walked away, heading toward the cooler for another beer. The tension broke slowly. Conversations resumed in fits and starts, people trying to pretend they hadn't just witnessed something uncomfortable and significant. My father came over to the grill, taking the spatula from my hand. He didn't say anything, just squeezed my shoulder the way he always did, that brief acknowledgement that meant more than words. My mother appeared at my side, setting down the lemonade and pulling me into a quick, tight hug. Proud of you, she whispered. I just nodded, not trusting my voice. Ryan stayed on the other side of the yard for the rest of the afternoon. He talked to his girlfriend, helped his mother, played with his younger cousins. But he didn't come near me, and I didn't seek him out. We both needed space to process. But as the sun started to set, I caught him watching me from across the yard. Our eyes met, and for just a moment, I saw something different in his expression. Not respect, not yet, but maybe the beginning of understanding. The realization that the world was bigger than he thought, and that toughness came in forms he'd never considered. I gave him a small nod, and after a hesitation, he nodded back. It wasn't reconciliation. It wasn't even really a truce. But it was a start. After that day, the family dynamic shifted. Ryan avoided me. His father didn't. A week later, he stopped by quietly. No uniform, no rank, just a man showing respect. He knocked on my apartment door at 1800 hours on a Tuesday. I was in my running clothes, about to head out for my evening PT, when I saw him through the peephole, Commander Hawking, in jeans and a navy t-shirt, hands in his pockets. No formal visit, no ceremony, just him. Sir, I said, opening the door. He shook his head. Jack. Just Jack tonight. I stepped aside and let him in. My apartment was sparse. Military standard, I used to joke. Couch, TV, a small kitchen table. Books on aviation and military history lined one shelf. A few photos on another, my squadron, my parents, a shot of me standing in front of my aircraft after my first solo flight. Nothing personal enough to hurt if I had to pack it all up on short notice. He looked around, nodded slowly, then turned to me. You got a minute? Of course. We sat at the kitchen table. I offered coffee, but he declined. So we just sat there in the kind of silence that would have been awkward with anyone else. With him, it felt appropriate. Commander Hawking wasn't a man who wasted words. When he spoke, it mattered. A moment of quiet vulnerability and profound impact. I wanted to apologize, he said finally, his voice rough, for not saying something sooner. I shook my head. You don't owe me an apology. I do, he countered, his gaze unwavering. I knew what you'd done. I knew your call sign, knew the story, and I let my son mock you at family gatherings because I thought. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I thought it was harmless. I thought you were strong enough to handle it. And you were. But that doesn't make it right. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to brush it off, to tell him it didn't matter, that I'd learned to let those comments roll off me. But another part, the part that had been carrying the weight of being underestimated for years, needed to hear what he was saying. I was strong enough to handle it, I said. But I shouldn't have had to. He nodded. No, you shouldn't have. He leaned back in his chair, and for the first time since I'd known him, he looked tired. Not physically, but in the way people look when they're carrying regret. Ryan's my son, and I love him, but I haven't done him any favors by letting him coast on my reputation. I don't know what I thought, that he'd figure it out on his own, that he'd find his own path. But instead, he's built his whole identity around proximity to something he's never actually done. He's not a bad person. I offered, and I meant it. Ryan was insecure, performative, sometimes insufferable, but he wasn't malicious. He was just lost. No, he's not, Jack agreed. But he's a coward in ways that matter. And that's on me as much as it is on him. We sat with that for a moment. Through the window, I could see the sun setting. Somewhere in the distance, a car alarm went off and then stopped. You flew that night in Hellman, Jack said. It wasn't a question. Yes, sir. You know, one of those SEALs was my former XO, Lieutenant Commander Barnes. He told me about it when he got back stateside. Said there was a pilot who came in low, cleared the corridor, took fire to do it. He said he owed his life to someone with the call sign Iron Widow. But he didn't know who you were. Didn't know your real name. I nodded slowly. I didn't do it for recognition. I know, Jack said, a faint smile playing on his lips. That's what makes it matter. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small coin, a Navy SEAL Challenge coin, worn at the edges from years of being carried. He set it on the table between us. This is from my unit. From the guys who were there that night and the ones who came after. Barnes sent it to me, asked me to find you and deliver it. Took me 3 years to realize you were family. I picked up the coin, feeling the weight of it in my palm. It was heavier than it looked, the metal cool against my skin. The SEAL trident was embossed on one side, a unit insignia on the other. I can't accept this, I whispered. You already earned it, he said, firmly. That's not up for debate. I closed my fingers around the coin and nodded, not trusting my voice. Jack stood up, and I followed. At the door, he paused and turned back to me. Ryan's going to have to find his own way. But I'm going to make sure he understands what real service looks like, what real courage looks like. And I'm going to make sure he knows that the people who matter don't need to talk about it constantly. They just do the work. Thank you, I said. He shook his head. Thank you for what you did that night. And for every night since. For serving with honor, even when nobody at home understood what that meant. After he left, I stood by the window for a long time, watching the last of the daylight fade. The coin was still in my hand, and I turned it over and over, feeling the ridges and grooves. It was a small thing, really, just a piece of metal, but it represented something larger. Acknowledgement. From the people who actually understood, who'd been there, who knew what it cost. I didn't need my family to understand what I did. I'd known that for years. But having someone like Jack Hawking bridge that gap, to translate my service into terms they might finally comprehend, that mattered more than I'd expected. The next morning, I went for my run, and then reported for duty at 0600. My squadron commander called me into his office at 0830. The promotion board results had come through. I was being promoted to major, effective in 30 days. I called my parents that evening. My mother cried. My father's voice went thick with pride. They'd always supported me, even when they didn't fully understand my career, and hearing their joy reminded me that some things, family, love, pride, transcended understanding. I didn't call Ryan. That bridge would have to be rebuilt slowly, if at all. But I thought about him as I hung up the phone, wondered if his father had talked to him, if he was beginning to see the world differently. I hoped so. For his sake, more than mine. The coin sat on my dresser next to my dog tags and my commissioning certificate. I looked at it every morning when I got dressed for work. A reminder that the people who mattered already knew. The rest would catch up eventually, or they wouldn't. Either way, I had a job to do. At the next family gathering, I didn't hide. When someone joked about office pilots, I answered directly, not defensively, just factually. I fly close air support. It's not glamorous, but it saves lives. Ryan tried to pivot the conversation, but the tone was different now. His father's respect had shifted the room. He finally muttered, "Didn't mean anything by it." I met his eyes. I know. That was all. Boundaries don't always need volume, just clarity. The gathering was a smaller affair than the summer barbecues. Just immediate family, a casual Sunday dinner. I'd been a major for 2 months by then. I walked in wearing my service dress uniform, blue coat, silver wings, the new oak leaves on my shoulders. My mother stopped mid-sentence. "Oh, Brittany, you look so official." My father came out of the kitchen, saw me, and smiled that private smile he got when he was proud. "Major," he said, testing out the rank. Suits you. Ryan was already there, sitting on the couch with his girlfriend, now his fiancée. He looked up when I walked in, and I saw him register the uniform, the rank, the insignia. His expression flickered, surprise, maybe a hint of something I couldn't quite name, before settling into neutral. "Hey, Brittany," he said. Later, someone, a retired electrician named Frank who'd known my family for decades, made a joke about pilots. You know what they say about Air Force pilots, right? They're glorified bus drivers with better offices. He was laughing, clearly not meaning any harm. A few people chuckled politely. I set down my fork and looked at him. Not angry, not offended, just direct. I fly close air support. It's not glamorous, but it saves lives. The table went quiet. Frank's smile faltered. "Oh, I didn't mean, I know," I said. "But since we're talking about it, close air support means I'm providing cover for ground troops in active combat zones. When they're pinned down, taking fire, running low on ammo, I'm overhead. I'm the one making sure they get home." My mother shifted, uncomfortable. Ryan stared at his plate, but Commander Hawking was nodding slightly. My father had that same proud smile he'd worn earlier. Frank cleared his throat. That's real work. I apologize. Shouldn't have made light of it." "It's fine," I said, picking up my fork again. "Most people don't know what we do. That's not a criticism, just a fact." The conversation moved on, but something had shifted. People asked me questions, real questions. What kind of aircraft did I fly? How long were my deployments? What was it like being one of the few women in my field? I answered honestly, but without embellishment. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I was just tired of being misunderstood. Tired of letting other people's ignorance shape how I was perceived. Ryan was quiet through most of it. At one point, when I mentioned a mission where we'd provided cover for a convoy that had hit an IED, he interjected. "Sounds intense. Must be hard, too." He stopped, seemed to reconsider his words. "Must take a lot of focus." "It does," I said. He nodded, and I saw him glance at his father, who was watching the exchange with that same evaluating expression. After dinner, I helped my mother clear the table. Through the doorway, I could hear Ryan talking to his father, his voice lower than usual, serious. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was different from his usual performance. He sounded like he was actually asking questions instead of just holding court. When I brought out the coffee, Ryan caught my eye. "Hey, can I talk to you for a second?" We stepped out onto the back porch. It was cold, that sharp October cold that promised winter wasn't far off. I wrapped my arms around myself, and Ryan handed me his jacket without thinking. A small gesture, but notable. The true reconciliation, raw and honest. "I wanted to say I'm sorry," he said, his breath fogging in the air. "For all the stuff I said before. The jokes, the comments. I didn't understand what you actually did." "I know," I said softly. "My dad talked to me after that barbecue. Really talked to me, you know? Not just the usual pep talk stuff. He told me I'd been acting like a jackass, living off his reputation without earning anything of my own." I didn't respond. This wasn't about me validating his feelings or absolving him. This was something he needed to work through on his own. "I'm trying to do better," he continued. "Trying to figure out who I am outside of being his son or the guy who knows military guys. It's harder than I thought." "It usually is," I said. He laughed, a short, self-deprecating sound. "Yeah. Anyway, I just wanted you to know. I respect what you do. I should have said that years ago." I handed him back his jacket. "Didn't mean anything by it," I said, echoing his words from the barbecue, but without malice. Just acknowledgement. He smiled, understanding the reference. Fair enough. We sat in silence for a bit longer, but it was comfortable now. The kind of quiet that happens between people who've said what needed saying and don't feel compelled to fill every second with noise. "So what are you doing now?" I asked. "Mom said you left the logistics company." "Yeah, I'm working for a nonprofit now, Veterans Services. Helping guys transition back to civilian life, connecting them with resources, that kind of thing." I raised my eyebrows. "That's good work." "It is," he said, and there was genuine satisfaction in his voice. "I'm not pretending to be something I'm not anymore. I'm not a veteran. I didn't serve, but I can still help the people who did. And it turns out I'm pretty good at it. Good at listening, at navigating bureaucracy, at connecting people with what they need." "How'd you find it?" "Dad, actually," Ryan said. "After he retired, he started volunteering with them. Told me they needed help and that I should check it out. I figured, why not? Went in thinking I'd volunteer for a few weeks, and they ended up offering me a job. Commander Hawking still pushing you in the right direction? I teased. Ryan smiled. Yeah, but it's different now. He's not telling me who to be. He's just showing me options and letting me figure it out. And for the first time, I feel like I'm doing something that matters. Something that's mine. You know, I didn't know that feeling. That feeling of ownership over your work, of building something that reflected your actual values and capabilities rather than someone else's expectations. I knew it intimately. I'm glad, I said genuinely. Thanks. He finished his beer and reached for another. Can I ask you something? Sure. That night in Hellman, the one my dad talks about. What was that like? I'd been asked that question before, by reporters, by other pilots, by people who wanted a war story to tell at parties. I usually deflected, gave the minimum information necessary to satisfy curiosity without revealing anything real. But this felt different. Ryan wasn't asking for a story. He was asking to understand. It was terrifying, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Every alarm in the cockpit going off. Tracers coming up from the ground. Knowing that if I miscalculated by even a few meters, I'd either miss the target or get shot down. But there were people on the ground who needed help. And I had the training and the aircraft to provide it. So I did. Just like that? He asked, awe in his voice. Just like that? I confirmed. You don't think about being brave in the moment. You think about the calculations, the angles, the timing. The fear comes later, when you're back on the ground and you realize what could have happened. Ryan nodded slowly, processing. My dad talks about you to his SEAL buddies. Did you know that? No, I said, surprised. He does. They ask about family, and he mentions me, but then he talks about you. About Iron Widow. Says you're the real deal. That you've got the kind of courage he spent his whole career trying to instill in his teams. A powerful emotional beat, deep satisfaction. I felt my throat tighten again. Commander Hawking had never said anything like that to me directly. Praise from him was usually a nod, a brief acknowledgement. The kind of minimalist approval that military men specialized in. Hearing that he spoke well of me when I wasn't around, that hit differently. That means a lot, I said quietly. He's proud of you, Ryan said. And honestly, so am I. Took me a while to get there, but I am. We finished our beers as the sun started to dip lower, casting long shadows across the yard. My mother came out at one point to offer food, but we declined, content to just sit and talk. We covered easier topics after that. His work, my squadron, family gossip, his thoughts about maybe getting back into dating. When he finally stood to leave, we did hug this time. A real one, not the awkward half gesture from earlier. He clapped me on the back, and I returned it. Don't be a stranger, he said. I won't. And stay safe out there. Mom worries, but so do I. I will. I watched him drive away, his truck disappearing down the street, and felt something settle inside me. This wasn't a dramatic reconciliation. It wasn't some tearful moment of brotherhood restored. It was quieter than that, more honest. It was two people who'd hurt each other, intentionally and otherwise, finding a way to exist in the same space with mutual respect. My father came out onto the porch as I was gathering up the empty bottles. Everything okay? He asked. Yeah, I said, a genuine smile on my face. Everything's good. He nodded, understanding in the way he always did, without needing lengthy explanations. He's growing up. Finally, I said. We both are. Years later, I returned as lieutenant colonel. Commander Hawking had retired. Ryan had a family of his own. The family reunion that summer was bigger than usual, at a local park. I was stationed at Langley Air Force Base, working more administrative roles now, missing the cockpit, but finding satisfaction in the strategic work. I arrived mid-afternoon, still in civilian clothes. I'd learned years ago that wearing my uniform to family events created a barrier, made people treat me like a symbol rather than a person. Better to just be Brittany for a few hours. Ryan spotted me first. He was standing near the pavilion with Sarah, his wife, and their 4-year-old son, Evan. When he saw me, his face lit up with genuine pleasure. Brittany, we hugged. Easy and comfortable now. Sarah gave me a warm smile. Good to see you, Brittany. Ryan talks about you all the time. Good things, I hope. I teased. Always, she said, and the sincerity in her voice suggested she meant it. Evan was hiding halfway behind his father's leg, suddenly shy. He was small for 4, with Ryan's dark hair and Sarah's thoughtful eyes. Ryan put a hand on his son's shoulder. Evan, this is your Aunt Brittany. Remember the pilot I told you about? The boy's eyes went wide. He stepped out from behind Ryan's leg, suddenly less shy and more curious. You fly airplanes? I do, I said, crouching down to his level. Big ones. Pretty big fighter jets mostly. He thought about this for a moment, processing. Then, with the gravity that only small children can muster, he snapped a salute. Hand to forehead, earnest and slightly crooked. The final, deeply satisfying moment. I felt something catch in my chest. Without thinking, I returned the salute, crisp and proper. At ease, airman. He dropped his hand, grinning. Ryan was smiling, too, but there was something else in his expression. Pride, maybe, or profound satisfaction. He knows who Iron Widow is, he said quietly, looking at me. You told him? I asked, my voice a little thick. I did, Ryan said. Figured he should know his aunt is pretty much a legend. I'm not. I started to protest. You are, Ryan interrupted gently. And it's okay to let people know that. Especially family. Evan was already moving on, his attention captured by other cousins. But the moment lingered between Ryan and me. This was the closure I hadn't known I needed. Not an apology, not even an acknowledgement of past wrongs. But this. Ryan teaching his son to respect what I'd done, passing down an understanding that had taken him years to develop. Thank you, I said. He shrugged. It's just the truth. Later, Jack Hawking arrived, walking with a slight limp. Lieutenant Colonel, he said, testing out the rank, a knowing twinkle in his eye. Has a nice ring to it. We found a quiet spot. Command is lonely, he advised. Don't forget that the people under you need to see you human sometimes, not just competent. Learn from the best, I said. He laughed. Don't give me too much credit. You were always going to be exactly who you are. I just made sure my son didn't get in your way permanently. We watched Ryan playing with his son. He's doing better, Jack said. Took him longer than I would have liked, but he got there. He did, I agreed. And you never made it easy on him by being anything other than excellent, Jack said. That's a gift, even when it doesn't feel like one. You gave him something to measure himself against, something real instead of just my shadow. I considered that. I never thought about it that way. That my presence, my accomplishments, might have actually helped Ryan by forcing him to confront his own choices. But maybe Jack was right. Maybe we both needed each other to become who we were meant to be. I'm proud of both of you, Jack said, his voice soft. Different paths, different struggles, but you both figured it out. As the sun began to set, Evan ran over to me one more time. His shirt was grass-stained, his face flushed, but he was beaming. Will you come back again? He asked. Absolutely, I promised. And will you tell me about flying? I glanced at Ryan, who nodded encouragingly. I will. Next time I'm home, we'll sit down, and I'll tell you all about it. Cool. He started to run off, then turned back. Thanks for keeping people safe. It was such a simple statement, delivered with the uncomplicated sincerity that children specialize in, but it hit me harder than any formal commendation or promotion ever had. This was why the work mattered. Not for the medals or the rank, but for the people who got to go home safe, who got to raise their kids and live their lives, because someone was overhead when they needed help. You're welcome, I said, my voice a little thick. Driving back to base that night, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. The girl who joined the Air Force to prove something, who'd earned her wings, her call sign, and her rank through work most people would never understand. The woman who learned that credibility doesn't come from explaining yourself. That respect is earned through action rather than words. That the people who matter already know your worth. I thought about Ryan, finally comfortable in his own skin, teaching his son to respect service without needing to claim it for himself. About Commander Hawking, passing his wisdom forward to the next generation. About my parents, proud even when they didn't fully understand. In the end, revenge had never been the point. I'd never needed Ryan to suffer or to grovel. I just needed him to see me clearly. And I needed to stop waiting for his approval to feel valid. The moment I'd stopped explaining myself and started simply living my truth, everything else had fallen into place. The ones who mattered already knew. The rest caught up eventually. And the few who never did, they were irrelevant to the actual work, to the mission, to the life I was building, one decision at a time. Call to action. So, tell me, have you ever had a moment like that? A time when you realized you had to draw a line, to speak your truth, even if it meant challenging the people closest to you? How did you handle it, and what did you learn? I'd really love to hear your experiences in the comments below.